A Year on Punjab Frontier in 1848 to 49 by Major Herbert B. Edwards. Travel backwards in time and see our region and its people in years in 1848 to 49. Audiobook created by Salahuddin Sikandar. Draban, Musa Zai, Zarkani chapter. Background: in years 1848 to 49, Dera Ismail Khan region is under British hands after 20 or so years of Sikh rule under Ranjit Singh. Text of Chapter 12 of the book A Year on Punjab, Frontier, 1848 to 49. Draban, as it is vulgarly pronounced, ought, I believe, to be called Daraban, but it is not like the Smythes, whom the world insists on calling Smith. Draban means the closed pass, and the chief town with its tumble-down fort was intended by its founders to command the passes into the Shirauni hills. Only it doesn't. Draban is a small section of the Daman proper, or skirts of the hills, not extending across the Darajah to the Indus. It lies south and southwest of the country of the Gundapurs. Its boundary with Kolachi on the north is the Nulla, or stream of Zarkani, or Sawan on the west, the outer ridge of the Tukht Isuliman on the south, with the Babhurs, a line of pillars laid down by me, equidistant between the two disputed courses of the Kaura Nulla, or bitter stream. The geographical facts of division of lands on tribal basis are still valid today. Major Herbert B. Edwards has to his credit demarcation of boundary between Miankal and Baburs. On the east, the district of Sindh, as the natives still say in their hereditary geography, or, in more modern phrase, the district of Dera Ismail Khan. The Draban country altogether is about 12 miles by 21 in extent, and in character generally resembles the neighbouring country of the Gundapurs, but Draban is more undulated towards the hills. Its villages are surrounded by more trees and vegetation, and on the whole it wears a more cheerful and prosperous appearance. The possessors of Draban are the Miankal Afghans, a branch of the great Lohani tribe, who took it from a tribe of Afghan fakirs called Sawanis, now almost extinct, and another tribe named the Bukhtiaris, whom Elphinstone describes as having come originally from Persia. Here and there a few individual Sawanis may yet be found. The Bukhtiaris have long since become so mixed with their Miankal conquerors as to be almost identical. The subdivisions of Miankals are as follow. Miankals are subdivided into Sotkels: Sidekail, Shadikail, Belochkels, Ukakail, Ubakel, Shahakail, Mulakels, Mulakel, Gulamkel, and Passanis, whose Signkel are divided into Omazai, Varakay, Musakel, Musa Zai. The above families divided the land of Draban with the Bukhtiaris. Thus 1/4 of the country was monopolized by the Musa Zais, the most powerful branch of the Miankal tribe. The Musa Zais were subdivided into 4 families named Tajukail, Kanakel, Mudikail, Mumansi. No other family of the Miankals had any interest in the lands of the Musa Zais, who formed a distinct colony of their own at a considerable town named Musa Zai on the southern border of the Draban country, who gave 1/4 of their own 1/4 of the Draban to the Khan of the Miankals on account of a canal named Boulay, which his family had cut to irrigate their lands, and the remaining 3/4 of Draban they again divided into 4 parts, and each took 1. No other family of the Miankals had any interest in the lands of the Musa Zais, who formed a distinct colony of their own at a considerable town named Musa Zai on the southern border of the Draban country. The remaining 3/4 of Draban were first classified as Vishabay and Tandabi, or dry lands and irrigated lands, and then distributed as follows. Of the 96 Morns, 20 went to the Sidekail, Shahikail, Mulahels, and Gulamkel, 20 to the Shadikail and Beloshkel, 20 to the Omazai, Baruki, Zukari, and Mushakail, 20 to the Ubakail, Ukakail, and Pusunay, and the remaining 16 to the Buktiaris, the Tandobi, or irrigated lands, were for the sake of popular calculation and comprehension, assumed to be equal to 96 mounds. Of the 96 mounds, 20 to the Shadikails, Beloch, Kals, 16 to Sidekails, and Mulakel, Shahikails, Gulamkail, 10 nullahs, and 13 annas to the Musa Zai, Vuruki, Muskals, and Zukaris, 10.5 nullahs to the Buktiaris, 6.25 to Ukakakels, 3 nullahs, and 15 annas to Pusunay, and 4.5 to Ubakels. In the above allotment, it will be observed that wherever fractional parts of the nullah, or canal, fall to the share of a tribe, the fraction is called an anna. Now, an anna is a copper piece of money, the 16th part of a rupee, and consequently the integral nullah, or canal, is assumed to be equal to a rupee, that is, a running stream to a silver coin. A punster will see a very natural connection between these symbols in their mutual currency, but more sober inquirers will be amazed at the barbarism and absence of the very simplest land measures, which could drive a people to the standards of money and poised for the division of a plain surface. Nevertheless, these rude substitutes were very handy to a people ignorant of vulgar and decimal fractions, for as the shares of land were to determine the amount of revenue in coin or grain due from each shareholder, no measure could be more to the point than fractional shares of coin and weight. These divisions, which were made when the Miankiles first took the country from the Sawanis and Buktiris, have held good to the present day, and every village in Draban, except those of the Musa Zais, whose separate quarter has been before described, is still parcelled out by the above standard to every family of the Miankiles. The merchant landowners themselves live all together in their chief town of Draban, like Irish landlords in London and beyond, receiving their shares of the rent, have no concern whatever with the villages, which are inhabited only by the Musaras, cultivating tenants. There is, however, this honourable distinction between them and the generality of Irish landlords, whether Saxon or Celtic, the rent which they consider fair. They take directly from the people, and if mountain robbers come down to plunder the people's fields, the gentlemen of Miankiel take horse and sword and shield and venture their lives in defence of their tenantry, whereas, with some few exceptions, such as those of the Marquis of Lansdowne, Lord Bantry, and Mr. Herbert of Muckross, the estates I lately passed through in Ireland seemed not merely to be harried but actually occupied by chevaliers d'industrie, called in the language of the country middlemen, to whom it appeared to me that both the tenants and the landlords paid very blackmail indeed, but to return from Ireland to the Indus. When the Daulat Kyles settled in Tak and the Gundapurs in Kolachi, they gave up as tribes their migratory commerce with Khorasan, though individual merchants from both countries still join the yearly caravans of the Pawindus. But the Miankals of Drabund adopted a wiser plan and used their agricultural settlement in Drabund as a centre for their commerce, midway between their two great termini, India and Bokhara, half at least the tribe, with all their women and children, as in the days when they had no local habitation, are constantly engaged in the common traffic, while the rest carry on the common agriculture, and the benefit of this double enterprise is conspicuously visible in the superior wealth and prosperity of the Miankale to that of any other tribe in the Daman, unless, indeed, their southern neighbours, the Baburs, who have followed a similar policy, may dispute the palm with them. It will be presently shown that the Miankile agriculture is favoured by very light taxes, but it is less to this than to their commerce that the riches of the tribe are to be traced. Their caravans are the most valuable that come to India from Khorasan, containing less fruit than those of the Nassas and Karatis, and more stuffs and dyes. The result is in their personal appearance and conduct. They dress better, live better, behave better, and are altogether less savage than the other Pawinda tribes. The sense of wealth gives an importance and respectability to their manners, and they have too much at stake to involve themselves in quarrels with any government, however exacting. A mean Kyle merchant will remonstrate with all the eloquence of avarice and bribe with all the generosity of a smuggler, but he seldom or never resists ill-used authority with the vulgar desperation of a needy man. Another sign of their being well-to-do in the world is this: the Miankels do not take military service. They hold the opinion of the song that he may take castles, who has not a groat, and are not ashamed to own that they had rather led caravans through the defiles and snows of the Suleimani range than armies into that profitless breach, where the exchange is against both parties. But let me do them justice. This is worldly wisdom, and not cowardice. A small band of mean Kyles followed me out of gratitude to Multan and Hussun Khan. Their chief died in leading them to the front. I could gain no information of the condition of the Mayan Kyles of Draban under the kings of Kabul, but they subsequently fell, at the same time as their neighbours, under the dominion of the Nawab of Dera Ismail Khan. At this time, the head of the Mian Kyles was Umar Khan, an able and ambitious man who, having usurped the chieftainship of his own tribe, was much more inclined to destroy its independence himself than to submit to an interloping conqueror. And the Nawab, finding him in the way, sent one of his most honourable captains with a Koran to swear a solemn oath of peace with him. The oath was accepted, the Koran opened, and the whole party knelt down to pray when the Khan was seized by some guards from behind and carried off a prisoner. The Nawab of Dera rode out on the Draban road in the evening to meet the returning captain, not without much anxiety as to the result, and when he saw Umar Khan a prisoner, he got into such good humour that he had his head chopped off on the spot. The captain in this story was the Payanda Khan, afterwards one of the Yagirdars of Tak, who was treacherously murdered by Malik Fateh Khan, Tawana. My reader who has perused both tales will probably think he was well served. The other character, the Nawab, still survives, but has been equally overtaken by the nemesis of time, with a princely pension of nearly 1 lakh of rupees per annum, and every luxury that Eastern wealth can furnish. His existence is a curse, in-linked misery long drawn out. A fire consumes his body, which the coolest sherbet cannot quench, nor ice extinguish. And there the once strong man, whose greatest pride it used to be to wrestle with the Rustams of his court, wastes away, an effeminate hypochondriac, whose slaves restlessly fan him all the winter and sprinkle him with ewers of water all the summer. Without the virtue of Diogenes, his happiness is confined within the narrow limits of a tub. The revenue of Draban was now changed, instead of a fixed tribute of 18,000 rupees a year. Prince Nau Nihal Singh decided on taking from the agriculturists 1/7 of the produce of their land, from the merchants 1,000 rupees a year trince, or grazing tax, and a like sum from the shopkeepers and artisans. The effect of this new arrangement was to get about 3,000 rupees a year, more than formerly from the merchants and landowners of Draban. But it was still a very unusually light tribute, with reference to the resources of the country, and I have always accounted for it by supposing that it was a prudent concession to a very powerful tribe, whose commerce might be expected to contribute more largely than their agriculture to the public treasury. Nau Nihal Singh's settlement of the Draban revenue held good until Dewan Lucky Mal got the farming of Dera Ismail Khan, when that ingenious financier added following items to the account. For barefaced impudence, I suppose nothing in the whole history of taxation can exceed the above, and the sufferers who recounted the items to me could not help laughing at them themselves. After Dewan Luki Mal's death, Daulat Ray followed dutifully in his father's steps and abated not a fraction of these irregular demands, but took anything more he could pick up. Yet all the inquiries I made led me to believe that 1 year with another, 20,000 rupees, Mirabi, of 14 annas each, was as much revenue as Draban ever yielded to the Siksin, the Lahore Durbar office. The revenue of Drabund was registered at 41,000 rupees, but this sum was an estimate spitefully made by Malik Fateh Khan Tawana in order to get the rent raised on his enemy, Daulat Rai, and the Malik was caught in his own trap. For when called to give an account of his own stewardship of those countries, the revenue of Draban was assumed to be what he had himself deposed. The Lahore government indeed had little or no means of ascertaining what any of their upper Trans-Indus territories produced, for they always farmed the revenues to contractors, like Lucky Mull, Daulat Rai, and Fateh Khan, and consequently never knew the details of profit or loss. But in the Hindu year 1903, in a fit of jealousy, they refused to let Daulat Rai rent the province of Ismail Khan, and only employed him as their own agent. The returns of this period, therefore, were the only authentic records which the Lahore Durbar possessed of the revenues of Drabund, and they extend over a year and a half, supposing these 3 half years to have yielded average harvests. Then an average year's revenue of Drabund under the Sikhs was 20,522 rupees, which, as I said before, is probably a just estimate. But as I was ordered to make a new settlement of all the countries under my charge, I caused the Sikh Kardar to prepare a statement of the payments for the last 6 years from the village records, which he did, and exhibited an average of only 17,447, of which 11,888 were from the 1/7 of land produce, 1,054 from taxes on shops, and 4,505 from other cesses, which fell on the landowners exclusively. The condition of the people under this state of the revenue was as follows. First, the Crown took 1/7 of land produce. The second claim was by right that of the Khan of the tribe, now Uzim Khan, the second and only surviving son of the murdered Umar Khan. He was entitled to 1/10 of the remaining 6/7 of produce from the Vaika Bay, or dry lands, the value of which tithe was about 1,400 rupees a year. From the Tandabi, or irrigated lands, he was allowed no tithe at all. The Musa Zai side of the tribe gave him 1/4 of their whole produce in consideration of the benefit they derived from Umar Khan's canal, called Buli, and the income of this was about 900 rupees a year. He had besides a considerable income from his own private property, but this has nothing to do with his position as chief of the Mankiles. Uzim Khan, though of a good disposition and character, was totally destitute of the spirit and ability of his father, or his elder and deceased brother Fateh Khan. So Diwan Daulat Rai regarded him as a fat ram and sacrificed him forthwith by confiscating 1/2 of all his possessions, public or private. So gross an act of oppression required an indulgence. That blasphemous bargain which man presumes to make with his goad in other churches besides that of Rome, the Buli revenue from Musa Zai was laid at the feet of a priest called Riza Muhammad, who sanctified with his benediction the robbery of the rest. One of my first acts in Drabund was to restore Uzim Khan private property and his tithe of dry lands, though I commuted the latter into a pension of 1,000 rupees a year, to be paid him out of the government revenue. The Buli property I could not restore, for the Musayas disputed it, and the case was yet untried when the Multan War broke out, after the Crown and the Khan. The next claim was that of the Mankiles landlords, who proceeded to pay out of the balance whatever irregular cesses the Divan imposed, and then took a full 2/7 for themselves out of the remainder, thus leaving between 3/7 and 4/7 to the cultivator, or about 1/2. This was the custom in the Vishabi, or dry lands. In the Tandabi, or irrigated lands, the account was considerably modified by the landlord furnishing his tenant with the seed and taking 4/7 and 1/4 of produce in consequence, but 2/7, or equivalent thereto was the share of produce which the Mayankyle Zumayandars professed to pocket by the arrangement in effect. However, contrary to the custom of all the other countries trans-Indus, the cultivators of the irrigated lands were worse off in Drabund than the cultivators of the lands dependent on rain. Still, they must have been comfortably situated, for they merely grumbled, which is and has been incidental to cultivators since the days of Cain. They did not scream when they caught sight of a European coming to their assistance, like the people of Kolachi, Merwut, and Derafute, Khan indeed, when I ordered the Mayankyles to let it in, future be optional with their tenants to take seed or find it themselves. Many preferred the old arrangement thus. In Draban, all parties were well off but the government, and it was obviously inconsistent that the Mayankyle landowners should enjoy double the revenue of their Sikh conquerors. The sword was the title deed of both, and whatever virtue there may be in conquest is assuredly strength. Accordingly, in remodelling the revenues of Drabund, I raised the share of government from 1/7 to 1/5, and reduced the share of the earlier conquerors from 2/7 to 1/6, which was afterwards raised to an equal share with government in consideration of the following military service. Great part of the arable lands of Drabund, which lie next to the hills, are waste in consequence of the depredations of the Shirvanese. This thievish tribe, which inhabits the eastern slopes of the great mountain called Solomon's Throne, used to be at peace with the Minkyles, until one Devi Das, who was the Sikh Kada of Drabund, in Luke Ki Mul's time hung a Shirvani who had been caught in the village of Zarkani on suspicion of theft. The mountaineers watched an opportunity, when the majority of the Minkyles were absent, repairing Adam at some distance from the town, and making a rapid descent on Drabund, plundered it of everything they could lay their hands on this. The Kadar told the Mayankales they must either be enemies of the Shirvanese or of the government, and a regular feud was established. The Shirvanese made a second descent in Malik Fateh Khan's time, and the loss of life on both these occasions only sharpened the mutual animosity. In the language of the country, Badai, or evil doings, have been rife between the Shirvanese and Mayankyles ever since. Every now and then, as on the Kolachi border, the Shirvanese carried off a Hindu and ransomed him for sums varying from 500 to 1,000 rupees, so that I found all the Kuthris of Drabund living in the houses of their Mayankyle masters for protection, nay, more. There were no less than 5 villages on the Drabund border: Shah Alum, Zarkani, Isa Khan Ki Kote, Lal Khan Ki Kote, and Mustan Ki Guri, which, to escape farther devastation, gave 1/14 of their crops as blackmail to these pests of the frontier. Against these incursions, the government garrison at Drabund could not possibly protect the people, for Drabund, if built with that view, as its name implies, should have been set between the cultivation and the hills, whereas it is behind the cultivation. And by the time the alarm was brought from the fields to the fort, the Shirvani plunderers had re-entered the mountain passes with their booty, so finding the fort useless, the people abandoned the fields in front of it, a loss of ground which I resolved to recover by advancing the outpost from Drabund to a spot called Gul Hubib, between the town and the pass, where a deserted fort still stood. It was requisite, however, to strengthen the garrison. If they were to hold such a bold position, and the Mayankyles agreed to furnish 25 horsemen for permanent duty at this outpost, and 10 others at Musa Zai for the protection of that town, on which conditions raised their share from 1/6 to 1/5. The tax of 4 rupees each on these would yield 952 rupees a year, so that the government net revenue of Drabund was fixed at 17,664 rupees. I have less confidence in the return made to me of houses and mails in Drabund, as it is possible it might have been influenced by the belief, so common among natives that a ruler can have no motive for taking a census of heads or houses, except that of imposing a poll tax or house. The number of houses registered in all Draban was only 1,545, and males 3,374. The extent of land registered was 86,926 gumals. Of this, 36,700 were waste, 30,550 capable of cultivation, under proper protection and encouragement, and 19,676 actually cultivated, of which 6,256 were tandabi or irrigated, and 13,420 vikabi or dry lands. There were 654 ploughs in occupation, so that each worked about 30 rupees or 10 shillings a year. It remains now only to mention the towns and hill frontier of Draban. The chief town from which the country derives its name is built of mud, and when I saw it, it was dirty and ruinous. It had a covered bazaar of very melancholy dimensions, and a fort which, in fact, was a bad stable yard, in the middle of the town and surrounded by much better houses, from the tops of which the garrison might be massacred. Below the town to the eastward, a stream called the Lahore, which issues from the Sharani hills at the pass of Draban, flows in a very deep ravine. The only thing of which Draban has to boast is, I believe, a single mango tree, the fruit of which has such delicious flavour that Ranjit Singh used to have it sent to him at Lahore. About 3 miles from Draban, to the south, stands Musa Zai, which is by far the best town in the Mankiel country, though it is only the capital of 1 quarter. It is larger, cleaner and more prosperous than Draban, and though it is situated close to the mouth of the Zam Pass, into the Sharani hills, its gallant and worthy chief, Husn Khan, had managed to defend the colony against all the attempts of the Sharanis. His manly form and face are still before my sight, and his merry voice still rings in my ear, though the silent grave closed over both beneath the field he helped to win at Sadusam. One word as to the hill frontier of this country. I explored it one morning with a party of 50 or 60 horsemen, with a view to ascertaining the position of the passes by which the Shiranis descend to plunder, and how they might best be guarded against. From the right bank of the Zarkani, or Sawan stream, which issues from the Zarkani Pass and is the boundary of Draban with Kalachi, to the Kara Nula, or Bitter stream, which issues from the Pass of Zam and is the boundary of Draban with Chutwan, is a distance of between 10 and 12 miles, and this is the mountain or western frontier of Draban. It contains 3 passes into the hill country of the Shiranis, viz. the Zarkani on the northwest of Draban, the Draban Pass nearly due west, and the Zam southwest. The Pass of Zarkani is about 2 kos from the village of the same name, which is in the country of Draban. It is from this pass that the majority of the Shiranis issue to harass the Gundapurs of Kolachi, and it was my intention to have repaired the walls of the village of Zarkani and made it a strong outpost for the Kolachi patrols, although in fact a short distance beyond their border. The village of Zarkani is the exclusive property of a colony of sheikhs, who are fakirs, descendants of a celebrated fakir named Sheikh Haider, to whom, in days past, the Botanese are said to have given the land. A stream of the purest water reaches the village from the pass, and its course is marked by several noble shisham trees, which give the spot a picturesque appearance. Zarkani is rendered still more remarkable by its sacred ground containing the cemeteries of the Pawanders, on the southwest that of the Mayankales of Draban, and on the northwest that of the Nassas, who haunt the pastures of Kolachi. The graves are compactly made of piled stones, some all white, carefully selected, and all have large upright stones placed at the head. Baleen. The sheikhs of Zarkani, notwithstanding their sacred character, live in great fear of the Shiranis, to whom they pay 1/14 of their crops as blackmail, which shows that the Shiranis are not very superstitious, as to collect this blackmail, they have to pass the Ziyarut, place of pilgrimage, of Sheikh Haidar himself, which is in the mouth of the Zarkani Pass. It is by the Zarkani Pass that caravans go to Kandahar. About 5 or 6 miles to the south of the Zarkani Pass is the Pass of Draban, the mouth of which is about 8 miles from Draban itself. Not very far from midway between the town and the Pass of Draban, but rather nearer to the latter, are ruins of the former fort of Akund, Gul Hubib. This Akund, I was informed, belonged to a tribe called Hurial, connected with the Shiranis, the same probably as that of Huripol, mentioned by Mr. Elphinstone as a branch of the Shiranis, residing in the hills and valleys at the western base of Tukht-i-Suliman. Close to the fort of Gul Hubib stands a rain-furrowed mound called by the people a dare, and which would probably prove to be another link in the chain of Greco-Bactrian outposts mentioned in my description of the frontier of Tukh. From the Draban Pass issues the Lahore, which flows by Draban town and a small branch of it, whose course is beautifully marked and shaded by shisham trees, confers one more advantage on the site of Gul Hubib. About 5 miles from the Pass of Draban and farther to the south is the Pass of Zam, from which flows a stream which is the ancient boundary between the Mian Kales of Musa Zai and the Babhurs of Chudwan, and which has caused a bloody feud by dividing into 2 branches and leaving a debatable land between them, of the settlement of which I shall have occasion to tell the reader presently. It is from this pass that the Shiranis attack the town and lands of Musa Zai, but while that town is itself well situated to resist them, if kept well garrisoned and well repaired, the land along the whole length of the frontier I have described is waste throughout a breadth of about 4 miles, half of which, nearest to the hills, is stony and unfit for culture, and the other half good arable land, but abandoned through fear of the Shiranis. My own opinion as to how such enemies are to be treated will be humbly offered in a later portion of this book. I cannot close this chapter better than by referring my reader to Chapter 3, Vol. 2, of Mr. Elphinstone's Kabul, for a highly interesting account of the Shirani people. Completed.